Serafina's legs burned as she ran, her small frame dodging between clusters of immortal nobility. At the dais, her mother lifted the ornate silver plate with both hands, the consecrated offering gleaming under candlelight. Dominic Ashford reached forward with ancient grace, his pale fingers extending toward the chalice of blood that would be his ceremonial first taste as king. Time seemed to fragment into crystalline shards. Serafina's voice caught in her throat. She was too far, too small, too late. The French curator's lips moved one final time across the room, a silent countdown she read with perfect clarity. 3, 2. She launched herself forward with every ounce of strength her 8-year-old body possessed. Her small hand connected with the silver plate just as Dominic's lips neared the rim. The impact sent the ornate vessel flying from Victoria's shocked grip, the consecrated blood arcing through the air in a crimson spray before the plate shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking bones. The entire hall fell into suffocating silence. Victoria's face drained of all color. Serafina. Oh God, oh God. Her hands trembled violently as she stared at the destruction, then at the vampire king, then at her daughter. Your Majesty, I am so sorry, she's just a child, she doesn't understand. The head server materialized like a vengeful spirit, gripping Victoria's arm with bruising force. You're finished. Security. His face was purple with rage. Bringing an undisciplined child to the coronation ceremony? This is grounds for immediate termination and arrest for disrupting a sovereign event. 2 security guards in dark suits moved forward, reaching for both mother and daughter. Stop. Dominic's voice cut through the chaos with the weight of centuries. He rose from the throne, his golden eyes fixed on the shattered plate. The spilled blood was smoking against the marble floor, eating into the ancient stone with a hiss that made several vampires step back in alarm. The vampire king knelt beside the destruction, producing a silk handkerchief to lift a shard of the ornate silver. Even from inches away, his skin recoiled from its proximity. He stood slowly, holding the fragment up to the candlelight where it gleamed with an unmistakable blessed sheen. Consecrated silver, Dominic announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Dissolved in the blood. His gaze swept across the frozen crowd, landing briefly on the 3 distinguished guests whose faces had gone carefully blank. An assassination attempt. At my own coronation. He turned to Serafina, who stood trembling beside her mother, small hands still raised from her desperate slap. This child just saved my life. Victoria's legs nearly gave out. The head server released her arm as if burned. Dominic's expression remained unreadable as he addressed the guards. These 2 are not to be touched. They are my honored guests. His tone made it clear this was not a request. Take them to my private study. Now. As the guard's grip shifted from restraint to protection, Serafina caught the French curator's lips moving one final time across the crowded hall. Impossible. No one could have known. But she had known. And now, there would be no going back. Dominic's private study was a fortress of old wealth, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, some predating the printing press. Victoria kept Serafina close, her arm wrapped protectively around her daughter's shoulders as the vampire king closed the heavy oak door with a finality that made the single mother's pulse spike. How did you know? Dominic's golden eyes fixed on Serafina with an intensity that would have made grown men falter. The plate was tested by my own food tasters. The blood came from verified sources. Serafina's voice emerged small but steady. I read their lips. The 3 men, they were talking without speaking. That's impossible, Dominic said flatly. No one was speaking about The Swedish ambassador told the Swiss banker the blessed silver is dissolved when they were across the room from each other. Serafina interrupted, her confidence growing. The French man counted down. 3, 2, 1. I saw every word. Victoria's grip tightened. Your Majesty, she has this ability. She can read lips from anywhere, in any language. I know it sounds. Dominic raised one pale hand, silencing her. He moved to the window overlooking the coronation hall below, where the ceremony had devolved into controlled chaos. Guards questioned guests while council members argued in tight clusters. "Prove it," he said, gesturing to the window. "Tell me what they are saying." Serafina approached the glass, her small frame barely reaching the windowsill. She scanned the crowd below, her dark eyes moving with methodical precision. The woman in the purple gown is telling the man beside her that the food was terrible. The guard by the east door is asking another guard about shift changes. She paused, her expression shifting to something more troubled. And the four people near the fountain, they are not speaking out loud either. Dominic's entire body went rigid. What four people? The woman in the red dress, the tall man with the grey beard, the younger man by the wine table, and the server near the back in trance. Serafina's voice dropped to a whisper. They are mouthing words to each other. The woman just said primary target survived. The bearded man responded, activate contingency protocol. The younger one said something about the child and dangerous witness. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Dominic pulled out his phone with preternatural speed, pressing a single contact. Lock down the estate. No one leaves. I'm sending you 4 descriptions. Detain them immediately. Charge: conspiracy to commit regicide. He listened briefly, then added with chilling precision. If they resist, you have my permission to use lethal force. He turned back to Serafina and Victoria, and for the first time since entering the study, something almost resembling concern crossed his ancient features. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, he said quietly. The Brotherhood of the Crimson Dawn doesn't leave witnesses. Especially not witnesses who can identify their agents with a single glance. Victoria pulled Serafina closer, her worst fears crystallizing into terrible reality. What does that mean for us? Dominic's expression hardened. It means you can never go home again. The armored vehicle drove through layers of security that would have impressed a military installation. Victoria watched through tinted windows as they passed stone walls embedded with technology she couldn't identify, guards stationed at intervals who moved with the fluid grace of predators, and finally, iron gates that looked centuries old but slid open with modern precision. The compound's interior was a seamless blend of Gothic architecture and cutting-edge security. Serafina's eyes widened at the vaulted ceilings, the ancient tapestries hanging beside sleek touchscreens, the way candlelight and LED strips illuminated the same corridors. Dominic led them to a control room that could have belonged to an intelligence agency. Wall-mounted monitors displayed dozens of camera feeds from the coronation hall, the estate grounds, and locations Victoria didn't recognize. A vampire in tactical gear nodded to the king and vacated his seat. The 4 you identified are in custody, Dominic said, pulling up footage on the central screen. But I need to know who else is compromised. My entire council was present tonight. He gestured to the monitors showing various camera angles. Can you review the footage? Tell me if anyone else was communicating silently. Serafina climbed into the leather chair, her small legs dangling as Victoria stood protectively behind her. The little girl's eyes moved across the screens with unsettling focus for someone so young. Most people are just talking normally, Serafina murmured, her finger tracing figures on different monitors. That man is complaining about parking. That woman is gossiping about someone's dress. She paused, leaning closer to one particular screen. Wait. Go back on camera 7. Dominic rewound the footage. The timestamp showed moments before the ceremonial offering, a side angle of the dais where several council members stood in formal arrangement. Him. Serafina pointed to a distinguished vampire in ornate robes, standing closest to the throne. Lord something. I heard people calling him Lord Erasmus. Victoria felt Dominic's entire presence shift into something predatory and cold. That's my first counselor, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He's served the Eastern Territories for 200 years. What did he say? Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. He was looking at the French man across the room. He mouthed the offering approaches and then long live the new order. She looked up at Dominic with frightened eyes. Is that bad? The Vampire King's jaw clenched with such force Victoria heard something crack. Erasmus has access to everything. Security protocols, safe house locations, the identities of every vampire loyal to my crown. He pulled out his phone again, but hesitated, staring at the screen with an expression Victoria had never seen on an immortal face. Fear. If Erasmus is compromised, I don't know who I can trust, Dominic admitted. The Brotherhood didn't just infiltrate my coronation. They've been inside my inner circle for God knows how long. Serafina's small hand reached out, touching the frozen image of Lord Erasmus on the screen. He said something else, right after. He said the child must not leave the estate alive. Victoria's blood turned to ice as Dominic's golden eyes met hers. Then we're all in more danger than I thought. The perimeter alarms triggered at 3:47 a.m. Victoria jerked awake from the leather sofa in Dominic's study where she'd finally dozed off, Serafina curled against her side. The Vampire King was already at the monitors, his movements too fast to follow. Federal agents at the main gate, reported the guard through the intercom. They have warrants. Something about investigating a disturbance at tonight's event and interviewing witnesses. Dominic's expression darkened. At 4 a.m? What agency? They are showing Homeland Security credentials, sir. And they specifically mentioned the child. Victoria's arms tightened around Serafina, who was now fully awake, her dark eyes alert and frightened. They can't just take her. This is private property. They have jurisdiction if they claim supernatural human relations violations, Dominic said grimly, pulling up the gate camera feed. 6 figures in dark suits stood beside 3 black SUVs, their credentials held up to the camera with bureaucratic precision. After tonight's incident, they could argue the coronation posed a public safety risk. The lead agent was speaking into the intercom now, his voice professional and impatient. Mr. Ashford, we need to interview all witnesses to tonight's disruption. We can do this cooperatively, or we can return with additional authority. Your choice. Serafina slipped from the sofa, moving to the monitors with that unsettling focus Victoria had learned to recognize. Can you zoom in on their faces? Dominic complied, enlarging the feed. The agents stood in a loose formation, their expressions neutral, patient. Waiting. Serafina's small finger traced from one face to another. The woman on the left just said something to the tall man. She didn't speak out loud. The little girl's voice grew more urgent. She said the king won't surrender her easily. Victoria felt her stomach drop. The tall man responded. Serafina continued, her eyes locked on the screen. We have legal authority. Once we're inside, Phase 2 activates. She looked up at Dominic, her face pale. The man in the middle, the one with the credentials, he just mouthed blessed rounds loaded. Dominic was already moving, pressing commands into a wall panel. Steel shutters began descending over windows with hydraulic precision. Those aren't federal agents. The Brotherhood has somehow acquired official credentials and jurisdiction. The lead agent spoke into the intercom again, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. Mr. Ashford, you have 60 seconds to grant us entry or we will breach under federal authority. The child is a witness to a crime and must be secured for her own protection. They keep calling me the asset, Serafina whispered, still watching the monitors. The woman said secure the asset, eliminate the king, purge the nest. Victoria pulled her daughter away from the screens, her heart hammering. How do we get out? There has to be another way. Dominic's jaw was set in grim determination as he moved to a bookshelf, pressing a concealed switch. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark stone passageway that descended into the earth. "The estate has tunnels," he said. "Built during the Revolutionary War, expanded during Prohibition. They run for miles beneath Greenwich." The intercom crackled one final time. 30 seconds, Mr. Ashford. "We're coming in." The tunnel walls were damp stone that smelled of earth and centuries. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they descended, casting long shadows that danced with each hurried step. Above them, the muffled sound of breech charges detonating made Victoria flinch, pulling Serafina closer. Dominic moved with predatory certainty through the darkness, navigating turns and intersections without hesitation. These tunnels connect to 12 different exit points across Greenwich. "They won't know which route we've taken." "How far do we need to go?" Victoria's voice echoed off stone walls that looked older than the nation itself. "There's a safe house in the old district. 3 miles northeast." Dominic paused at a junction, listening with senses far beyond human capacity. Satisfied they weren't being followed yet, he continued forward. "It was established by my former advisor. Someone who understood the importance of contingency plans." Victoria's foot caught on uneven ground and she stumbled. Dominic's hand shot out, steadying her with surprising gentleness for someone who'd lived through centuries of violence. "Your former advisor sounds paranoid," she managed, catching her breath. "He was brilliant," Dominic corrected. "And he had good reason to be careful. He possessed a gift almost as rare as your daughter's." The Vampire King's golden eyes found Victoria's in the dim light. He could read intentions. Not minds exactly, but the truth beneath words. Whether someone was human or vampire, honest or deceptive, he could perceive what they meant to do before they did it. Serafina's small voice cut through the tunnel. "Like knowing if someone was going to hurt you." "Exactly like that," Dominic said. It made him invaluable as a mediator. He could sit in rooms full of ancient vampires and power-hungry humans and know who could be trusted, who was plotting betrayal, who genuinely wanted peace. He paused at another intersection, his expression shifting to something almost vulnerable. "He saved my life at least a dozen times simply by saying, 'Don't trust that one or the alliance is genuine.'" Victoria felt a strange tightness in her chest. "What happened to him?" "He died 4 years ago," Dominic said quietly. "Car accident on I-95. Or so the official report claimed." His jaw clenched. "I've always suspected the Brotherhood, but could never prove it. A man with his abilities would have been their highest priority target." The tunnel seemed to close in around them. Serafina tugged on her mother's sleeve, her voice uncertain. "Mom, what was Daddy's job?" "The one you said you didn't like to talk about." Victoria's steps faltered. The world tilted sideways as puzzle pieces she'd spent 4 years avoiding suddenly locked into place with horrifying clarity. Dominic stopped walking. Turned. His ancient eyes met Victoria's with an expression that confirmed what she'd already begun to suspect. "Your husband's name was Marcus," he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "No. No, that's not possible. Marcus was a consultant. He traveled for work. But even as she spoke, memories crystallized differently. The unexplained absences. The way he'd sometimes look at people and just know things. His insistence on having multiple evacuation plans for their home. "He was my royal advisor," Dominic said gently. "And he was your husband. Marcus never told you what he really was, did he? What he could do?" Serafina's small hand found her mother's. "Daddy could see bad people." "Yes," Dominic confirmed. "And apparently, his daughter inherited something just as extraordinary." The safe house emerged from the tunnel network like a secret kept for generations. Hidden beneath what appeared to be an abandoned Greenwich brownstone, the space was surprisingly modern. Reinforced walls, independent power supply, and enough provisions for a prolonged siege. But it was the sealed door at the far end that captured Dominic's attention. Marcus called it the Covenant Vault, he said, approaching a biometric scanner that looked decades more advanced than it should be. He spent 15 years gathering evidence, building a case that would expose the Brotherhood's true agenda. His hand hovered over the scanner. I was supposed to access it only if he died under suspicious circumstances. Victoria sank into a chair, her mind still reeling. 15 years. Our entire marriage. He was protecting you, Dominic said. The less you knew, the safer you were. The Brotherhood has eyes everywhere, government agencies, corporate boards, even supernatural councils. He pressed his palm to the scanner. It flashed red. Denied. Of course. He wouldn't have made it that simple. Serafina wandered to the sealed door, her small fingers tracing the edges. There's writing here. Really tiny. Dominic knelt beside her, his enhanced vision catching what human eyes would miss. Microscopic text etched into the metal. The truth requires 2 keys, sight and blood. Blood I have, Dominic said, producing a small blade from his coat. But sight. He looked at Serafina with dawning understanding. Your gift. Marcus knew you'd inherit something. He built this vault to require both of us. Victoria stood abruptly. Absolutely not. I'm not letting my 8-year-old daughter get involved in. Mom, I'm already involved, Serafina said with heartbreaking maturity. The bad people know about me. They want to hurt us. Maybe Daddy left something that can help. The words cut through Victoria's protests like a knife. Dominic pricked his finger, letting a single drop of blood fall onto the scanner. It glowed blue, half-authenticated. There should be a secondary access point. Something requiring visual confirmation of a specific pattern or code. Serafina studied the door with intense concentration, then moved to the wall beside it. Here. There are marks. Like someone scratched words really light. She squinted, her lips moving as she traced invisible text. It says, "Speak what the blind cannot see, what the deaf cannot hear, what the faithless cannot believe." A riddle, Victoria whispered. Marcus loved riddles. Serafina's eyes widened. Truth. The answer is truth. She looked at Dominic. That's what you and Daddy tried to make, right? Truth between vampires and humans. The door's locks disengaged with a heavy metallic thunk. Beyond it lay a room filled with filing cabinets, servers, and wall-mounted screens. But what dominated the space was a massive digital map of the world, covered in red pins representing Brotherhood operatives embedded in positions of power. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Dear God, Victoria breathed. They're everywhere. Dominic moved to a central console where a video file waited, labeled simply, "If you're watching this, I'm already dead. Phase 1 begins now." He pressed play. Marcus's face filled the screen, older than Victoria remembered him, tired but determined. Dominic, Victoria, Serafina, her dead husband said, his voice causing Victoria's knees to buckle. The Brotherhood's plan isn't just to kill vampires. It's to create a war so devastating that both humans and vampires will beg for authoritarian control. They want to rule both species through manufactured fear. Marcus's recorded voice still echoed in Victoria's mind when the proximity alarms shrieked to life. Dominic's head snapped toward the monitors showing the tunnel entrance they'd used barely an hour ago. A single figure stood before the hidden door, not bothering with stealth or subterfuge. He was older, perhaps 70, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Unlike the fake federal agents, he wore simple dark clothing, and in his hand was something that made Dominic's expression turn to stone. A blessed silver blade, etched with symbols that seemed to drink in the light. "That's Grand Master Castellane," Dominic said, his voice barely controlled. "The Brotherhood's supreme commander. He hasn't personally conducted a hunt in 50 years. Why would he come himself? Victoria asked, pulling Serafina behind her. Because we found the vault. Dominic was already moving, pressing commands into the console.
He knows what Marcus gathered. He knows what we now have.
On the monitor, Castellane spoke directly to the camera, his lips moving with deliberate precision. Serafina watched, her face draining of color. He says there's nowhere you can run that we haven't already infiltrated. Surrender the child and the evidence, and the woman lives. Dominic grabbed a hard drive from the console, disconnecting cables with preternatural speed.
There's another tunnel.
Marcus built redundancies into everything. He moved to what appeared to be a solid wall, pressing a sequence into hidden sensors. A section slid open, revealing a maintenance shaft. This connects to the old subway tunnels. From there, we can reach Manhattan. Manhattan? Victoria's voice pitched higher. That's miles away. 4 to 5 minutes if we move fast. Dominic glanced at the monitor where Castellane was now placing something against the sealed door.
He's using a thermite charge.
We have maybe 3 minutes. They dropped into the shaft, landing in a tunnel that smelled of rust and decades of neglect. Dominic moved with certainty through the darkness, following a path only he seemed to know. Behind them, a muffled explosion sent tremors through the walls. He's inside, Dominic confirmed, his enhanced hearing picking up sounds Victoria couldn't perceive.
And he's not alone.
I count at least 6 others. They ran through abandoned subway passages, Serafina's small legs struggling to keep pace until Dominic simply lifted her, carrying her without breaking stride. Victoria's lungs burned, her service shoes never meant for this kind of desperate flight. There's a refuge beneath the New York Public Library, Dominic explained between turns. One of the oldest vampire sanctuaries in North America. Established before the city was even called New York. Will we be safe there?
Victoria gasped.
Safe is relative, Dominic said. But the sanctuary has protections even the Brotherhood respects. Ancient laws, older than their organization. Once we're inside, Castellane can't simply breach without triggering a supernatural war that would expose everything to the human world. They emerged into a tunnel lined with ornate stonework that predated modern architecture. Gas lamps flickered to life as they approached, responding to Dominic's presence. A massive door carved with symbols from a dozen ancient cultures stood at the passage's end. Dominic placed his palm against it and spoke in a language Victoria didn't recognize.
The door began to open.
Then Serafina gasped, looking back the way they'd come.
He's here. The old man.
He's mouthing something. Her voice cracked with fear. He says the sanctuary won't protect you forever, and the library holds more than books, it holds witnesses to your eventual death. The door sealed behind them just as footsteps echoed in the tunnel outside. The vampire sanctuary beneath the New York Public Library was a cathedral of preservation. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow, and alcoves held artifacts from civilizations that existed before recorded history. But Dominic led them past these wonders to a modern workstation incongruously installed in an ancient chamber. Marcus used this place as a secondary operations center, he explained, connecting the hard drive to a computer system that hummed to life. The sanctuary's protections extend to digital security. Nothing transmitted from here can be intercepted. The screen filled with file directories, thousands of documents, photographs, financial records, communication intercepts. Evidence of a conspiracy spanning centuries. Victoria stared at the overwhelming volume of data. How do we even begin to? There, Serafina interrupted, pointing to a video file with a name that made Victoria's breath catch, _my_starlight.mp4.
Starlight.
Marcus's pet name for their daughter. With trembling hands, Victoria clicked the file. Marcus appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like the Greenwich safe house. But something was wrong. He was speaking, his lips moving with obvious urgency, but no sound emerged from the speakers. "The audio is corrupted," Dominic said, checking the file properties.
Then his expression shifted. "No, it's not corrupted. There's no audio track."
He recorded it completely silent. "Why would he?" Victoria began, then understood. So no one could intercept it by sound alone. Serafina climbed onto the chair, her small face inches from the screen.
"He's talking to me."
He knew I'd be able to read his lips. Her voice wavered with emotion. "He says, my brilliant girl, if you're watching this, you've inherited your gift and the terrible responsibility that comes with it." Victoria wrapped her arms around her daughter's shoulders as Serafina continued translating Marcus's silent testament. "The Brotherhood believes they are protecting humanity, but they are enslaving it. I've documented their infiltration of every major institution, the UN Security Council, Interpol, the International Criminal Court. They have operatives in 17 vampire councils across 6 continents. Their endgame is a manufactured war that will let them seize control of both species under the guise of emergency authority." Dominic's jaw clenched as he pulled up the files Marcus referenced. UN officials with Brotherhood connections. Interpol agents on the Brotherhood payroll. Vampire Council members who were actually human operatives with falsified centuries-old identities. "The password to unlock the complete database is hidden in plain sight," Serafina read, tears streaming down her face now. "It's the thing I told you every night before bed, the truth that transcends species, the only thing more powerful than fear."
Victoria's voice broke. "Love."
"He always said love is the only thing that lasts." Serafina typed the word. The system unlocked, revealing files marked priority. Global War Protocol, Staged Attacks Timeline, Post-War Governance Structure. "They are planning attacks on both human and vampire populations," Dominic said, scanning the documents with increasing horror. "Making each side believe the other struck first. The first attack is scheduled for," his face went ashen, "72 hours from now. The UN General Assembly in New York." Marcus's silent message continued. Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. "This evidence must reach people on both sides who still value peace over power. Dominic, you know who they are. Victoria, trust him. And Serafina," she paused, her small body shaking. "Serafina, your gift makes you dangerous to people who rely on secrets. But it also makes you essential to those who believe in truth. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this burden. But I know you're strong enough to carry it." The screen went dark. Victoria held her daughter as grief and determination warred within her. Above them, in the library proper, closing time had come and gone. Outside, the Brotherhood waited. But now they had what Marcus had died protecting. Now they had the truth. The convergence happened at dawn, when the library's marble lions caught the first light. Dominic had spent the night making calls to contacts Marcus had identified as clean, vampire council members who'd resisted Brotherhood infiltration, federal agents who'd noticed irregularities but lacked proof, international prosecutors who'd suspected conspiracy but couldn't connect the threads. Now they gathered in the sanctuary's main chamber, an unprecedented assembly of humans and vampires united by Marcus's evidence. Victoria watched from beside Serafina as Dominic presented the files to a grim-faced woman from the FBI's Supernatural Affairs Division and an ancient vampire called Lady Morgessa who commanded the Atlantic Council. Both reviewed the documents with expressions that shifted from skepticism to horror. "If even half of this is accurate," the FBI agent said, her voice tight, "we have Brotherhood operatives in positions to trigger a global crisis." "It's all accurate," Lady Morgessa confirmed, her centuries-old eyes scanning financial records. "I recognize these transaction patterns. Blood money funneled through legitimate channels." She looked at Dominic with newfound respect. Marcus was more thorough than I imagined possible. Above them, in the library proper, tactical teams were already moving. Brotherhood operatives embedded in law enforcement found themselves surrounded by colleagues who'd finally learned the truth. At the UN building, security quietly detained members of delegations whose communications had been intercepted and decoded. Grand Master Castellane himself was apprehended attempting to flee through JFK Airport, Marcus's evidence having frozen his organization's assets and exposed his network within hours. The purge was surgical, coordinated, and devastating to the Brotherhood's centuries-old infrastructure. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in the same Greenwich estate where this had all begun, but the ceremony hall had been transformed. Where coronation decorations once hung, now diplomatic banners from a dozen nations and vampire territories created a tapestry of tentative peace. Dominic addressed the assembly with Serafina standing beside him on a specially built platform. The little girl wore a simple dress, but around her neck hung a pendant bearing the seal of the Royal Covenant, an honor granted to only a handful of humans in vampire history. Marcus gave his life believing that truth could bridge the divide between our species, Dominic said.
His daughter has proven that belief correct.
Serafina will serve as the royal voice, interpreter, mediator, and living reminder of what we can achieve when we choose understanding over fear. Lady Morgessa stepped forward, her ancient voice carrying weight. Under vampire law, the child and her mother are granted eternal protection. No harm may come to them from any vampire, under penalty of final death. The FBI agent, now heading a joint task force, added her own guarantee. The United States government extends similar protection under human law. Their identities, their safety, their freedom, all guaranteed. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she finally understood what Marcus had been building all those years. Not just evidence of a conspiracy, but the foundation of something better. A future where her daughter's gift wasn't a liability but a bridge. Serafina looked up at her mother with those perceptive dark eyes. Daddy knew, didn't he? That it would be us finishing what he started.
Victoria pulled her close. I think he hoped. And he made sure we'd have everything we needed.
That night, in their new home within the protected grounds of the Ashford estate, a place they could leave freely but return to safely, Victoria tucked Serafina into bed.
Mom, her daughter whispered.
Are we going to be okay? Victoria thought of Marcus's silent message, of Dominic's oath, of the unprecedented alliance now protecting them. She thought of all the ways their lives had shattered and reformed into something she never could have imagined. Yes, Starlight, she said, using Marcus's name for her. We're going to be okay. Outside, vampire guards patrolled in coordination with human security. In conference rooms across the world, councils met to discuss lasting peace. And in the Covenant Vault, Marcus's evidence continued to dismantle the networks of those who'd profited from fear and division.
The war had been prevented. The truth had won.
And a little girl who could read lips had saved 2 worlds by seeing what no one else could, the words people tried to hide, and the love her father had left behind.